Brandon Coleman stepped into First Heritage Bank just after noon, carrying the same worn leather briefcase his father left him years ago. Today was supposed to be a milestone, depositing the $10 million check that represented 5 years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and building a company from nothing. He expected a simple transaction, maybe a congratulations, maybe even a moment to breathe. Instead, the moment he handed the check across the counter, he felt the shift. The branch manager, Sarah Winters, looked at him with a tightening smile that wasn't really a smile at all. It was the look he had seen too many times before, doubt wrapped in politeness, suspicion dressed as professionalism. She held the check delicately, as if it didn't belong in her hands, as if it couldn't possibly be real because of the man standing before her. "Do you have identification?" she asked sharply. Brandon provided 2 forms. She demanded a third. People in line began glancing over, whispering as Sarah examined his documents with exaggerated slowness, typing and retyping information as if searching for something wrong. Brandon kept his voice calm, but inside he felt the sting, the same sting he had carried since childhood, the constant need to prove he deserved every space he entered. When Sarah finally called security, Brandon felt heat rise in his chest, not fear, but exhaustion. All he wanted was fairness, nothing more. He placed his phone on the counter, recording quietly, refusing to step aside. The customers behind him watched, frozen, unsure whether to speak or simply observe. And then Sarah made her decision, the one that would ignite everything. She picked up the check, held it high, and tore it straight down the middle. The sound echoed through the lobby like a rip across his future. She threw the pieces at his chest, accusing him of fraud, threatening to call the police, acting not as a manager, but as judge and jury. Brandon didn't shout. He didn't flinch. Slowly, he gathered the torn pieces, placed them in an envelope, and asked for her full name. The room went silent. He took photos, captured evidence, and just as he prepared to walk out, the doors opened behind him. The regional manager stepped inside, saw the paper scattered on the floor, saw Brandon, and his face changed instantly. "Mr. Coleman, sir," he said, voice trembling. And in that single word, "Sir," the truth of the entire moment was exposed. The moment James Anderson said "sir," the entire bank froze. Sarah Winters lowered her hand, confusion spreading across her face. She had expected praise for protecting the bank. Instead, her superior looked horrified. Brandon watched the color drain from Anderson's cheeks as he knelt to pick up the torn fragments of the check that Sarah had thrown away moments earlier. It was the first time anyone in that lobby had shown even a trace of remorse. But it was too late. Respect given after humiliation isn't respect, it's damage control. Sarah tried to defend herself, insisting she followed protocol, but her voice wavered. Anderson didn't let her finish. His tone shifted, stern, sharp, almost fearful. "Miss Winters, step into my office." Now, Brandon could see the panic behind her eyes, yet he felt no satisfaction. Just a heavy ache. The witnesses looked between them, suddenly aware of the gravity of what they had just observed. The elderly woman who had been silent earlier stepped forward, shaking her head slowly, as if ashamed she hadn't acted sooner. Anderson apologized repeatedly, voice trembling with a mixture of guilt and desperation, urging Brandon to speak privately. But Brandon stood firm. "You want privacy so no one hears the truth," he said quietly, his words slicing through the tension. The security officer, who moments earlier stood ready to escort Brandon out, now looked down at his shoes. No one in that room could pretend anymore. The truth was too visible. Brandon walked out, leaving behind a bank full of faces unsure how to process what they had witnessed. But the moment he reached his car, his hands shook, not from fear, but from the injustice he had swallowed for far too long. He sat in silence, the torn check beside him, replaying every second in his mind. His phone vibrated. Anderson again. Apologies, explanations, promises. But apologies could not glue the paper back together or erase the humiliation of those 52 minutes. That night, Brandon didn't sleep. The weight of staying silent felt heavier than the risk of speaking up. So he began gathering evidence. Every document, every recording, every detail. And when he finally posted his experience on LinkedIn, not naming the bank, not showing the recording, just telling the truth, his story spread like wildfire. Hundreds of comments poured in. People he had never met shared similar experiences. Journalists reached out. Friends offered support. And then one message appeared from a civil rights attorney he knew from a conference. "Call me. You're not fighting this alone." Brandon knew then. This wasn't just about a torn check anymore. It was about every person who had been made small in a place where dignity should have been the default. Brandon woke before sunrise, the weight of yesterday still gripping his chest. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and replayed the recording from the bank. Every second felt heavier the more he listened. The repeated demands for ID, the rising tension, the humiliating accusations, the sound of paper ripping. By the time he reached the moment Anderson said, "Sir," Brandon felt the shift in his bones. That one word revealed everything. How quickly respect appears once power is recognized. But what about the minutes before that? What about the version of him they assumed was unworthy? His inbox buzzed, journalists asking for interviews, strangers sharing their own stories, friends offering support. One message stood out. It was from Elena Martinez, an investigative reporter. She asked to meet privately, promising no sensationalism, just truth. Brandon agreed. If he stayed silent, then this would be just another moment swept away. And he was tired of moments being forgotten. At the coffee shop, Elena listened intently as Brandon shared the full story. She took notes carefully, not interrupting, not doubting, just documenting. When he showed her the recording, she didn't flinch. She simply said, "You know this isn't isolated. When we publish this, others will come forward. Are you ready for that?" Brandon nodded. He didn't want revenge, he wanted change. He wanted the next person who looked like him to walk into a bank without carrying proof of their worth. Later that day, Brandon met with the civil rights lawyer, Jordan Hayes. Calm, focused, strategic. Jordan didn't sugarcoat anything. He made it clear the path ahead would be loud, public, and confrontational. "They will try to settle quickly," he warned. "They'll hope money buys your silence. But if you want change, we go all the way." Brandon agreed without hesitation. That night, his LinkedIn post exploded. Thousands of reactions, shares, private messages. People he never met described nearly identical incidents, some worse, some hidden for years. Brandon read each message slowly, realizing his story had touched something far deeper than one torn check. It had cracked open a door people were waiting to walk through. As the city buzzed online, the bank's executives scrambled. Emails leaked. Pressure mounted. And while Brandon hadn't named the bank yet, people connected the clues. Elena scheduled her article for release. Jordan prepared official complaints. Community groups reached out. It felt like a storm forming, but for once the storm was on the side of truth. Yet in the quiet moments, Brandon still thought of his daughter. Would she grow up facing the same silent battles? Would she have to carry extra documents just to prove she belonged? As he watched her sleep, he made himself a promise. He would not let this story fade. Not for himself, not for her, not for anyone who had ever been made to feel small when all they wanted was fairness. The fight had already begun, and for the first time, Brandon felt ready. Elena's article dropped early in the morning, and within hours the city was buzzing. The headline was direct, powerful, impossible to ignore. Brandon's story was laid out with clarity. His calm responses, Sarah's escalating suspicion, the torn check, the delayed respect. Elena included excerpts from the recording, witness statements, and a careful breakdown of how bias disguised as procedure had turned one simple transaction into a public humiliation. The article didn't accuse blindly. It analyzed, questioned, and exposed the pattern lurking beneath the surface. By noon, the comment section had become a river of testimonies. Dozens of people, then hundreds, described eerily similar moments at banks, stores, workplaces, moments where assumptions had stripped them of dignity. Brandon read them slowly, each one a reminder of how often silence had been forced onto people until their experiences faded into nothing. But now, those voices weren't fading. They were rising. The bank released a statement attempting to contain the damage, labeling the incident as a misunderstanding, promising an internal review. But the public wasn't fooled. Too many stories matched, too many patterns aligned. Community leaders spoke out. Local news aired segments. Social media flooded with hashtags demanding accountability. Brandon's inbox filled with support, gratitude, and requests for interviews. He accepted a few, choosing platforms that valued truth over shock value. Meanwhile, Jordan prepared the legal groundwork. He reviewed past complaints, contacted witnesses, and gathered evidence that suggested systemic issues rather than a one-time failure. "This isn't about one manager," Jordan said during a meeting. "This is about an institution that built walls and called them policies." Brandon listened, feeling both the weight and the purpose of what they were building. At home, Brandon tried to keep life normal for his daughter Maya, but even she sensed the growing storm around them. "Daddy, is everything okay?" she asked gently one evening. He hugged her tightly. "It will be. I'm making sure things get better, not just for me, but for everyone." She nodded, trusting him completely. That trust reminded him why he couldn't turn back now. Days later, something unexpected happened. A former customer contacted Elena, claiming he had once filed a complaint against the same bank, but was convinced not to pursue it. Then another reached out. And another. Their stories varied, but the thread connecting them was unmistakable, judgment rooted in appearance, not facts. As these accounts piled up, public pressure intensified. Protests formed outside the bank's headquarters, not violent or chaotic, but united, diverse, and determined. Brandon attended quietly at first, blending into the crowd. But when someone recognized him and asked him to speak, he hesitated only a moment. Standing before them, he didn't deliver a dramatic speech. He spoke simply, honestly. "This isn't about one check," he said. "It's about every moment someone was treated like they didn't belong before anyone even bothered to know them." The crowd erupted in applause, not for him personally, but for the truth in his words. Brandon felt something shift. This fight was no longer his alone. His story had become a mirror reflecting a struggle shared by countless others. And as more voices joined the chorus, the bank realized something important. This time, silence would not save them. The date of the public hearing arrived faster than Brandon expected. By then, the story had grown far beyond a single incident. Former employees had leaked documents, customers had come forward in waves, and legal pressure had pushed the banking commission to open a full investigation. The hearing room overflowed with reporters, community members, and curious onlookers. Cameras lined the walls, recording every movement. Brandon sat quietly in the front row, hands steady despite the tension humming around him. Sarah Winters was called first. She looked smaller than Brandon remembered, shoulders stiff, eyes darting between her lawyer and the commissioners. Under oath, her rehearsed explanations unraveled quickly. When asked why she hadn't called Premier Logistics to verify the check, she had no answer. When confronted with footage showing white customers depositing large sums with minimal questioning, she faltered again. The room grew heavier as her training manual was introduced. Phrases like unlikely customer profile and inconsistent presentation, exposed for what they truly were, coded excuses for discrimination. Sarah tried to defend herself, but her silence between questions spoke louder than anything she said. Then came James Anderson. His testimony was steadier, but guilt sat heavily in his voice. He admitted recognizing Brandon, admitted that his tone changed after that recognition, admitted he had no idea how many similar incidents had been quietly dismissed over the years. When questioned whether he would have called Brandon sir if he hadn't recognized him as a successful entrepreneur, he hesitated. Too long. The truth settled into the room like a weight everyone could feel, but no one could ignore. Finally, Brandon took the stand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse with anger. He simply told the story from the beginning, describing the humiliation of having to justify his legitimacy in front of strangers, the shock of watching his hard-earned check torn to pieces, and the moment he realized respect had arrived only after his identity was recognized. He spoke slowly, every word measured but powerful. As he finished, the room stood still. Even the commissioners paused before proceeding, acknowledging the emotional gravity in the air. Outside the hearing room, a crowd gathered, watching the live stream on their phones. When Brandon stepped out, applause began, not as celebration, but as acknowledgement. He nodded quietly, humbled but resolute. This wasn't victory yet. It was a step toward accountability. The preliminary ruling came that same afternoon. The Banking Commission cited systemic failures, discriminatory practices, and irresponsible oversight. Sarah Winters was recommended for termination and barred from future banking roles. Anderson received formal reprimand and mandatory retraining. The bank itself faced heavy fines, required reforms, and third-party monitoring. More importantly, A new requirement for public transparency was introduced. Past complaints would no longer be hidden. Brandon listened carefully to every word, feeling both relief and sorrow. Relief that truth had finally been recognized. Sorrow that so many had suffered before anyone paid attention. When he walked out, journalists rushed forward, microphones raised, cameras blinking. Brandon lifted a hand, not to block them, but to quiet the noise. "This isn't the end," he said softly. "It's the beginning of something better." And for the first time in weeks, he felt the weight on his chest begin to ease. Not because the fight was over, but because people were finally listening. Weeks passed after the hearing, but the impact continued to ripple across the state. The Banking Commission's final order went public. Heavy fines, mandatory oversight, a compensation fund, and full disclosure of past cases. Newspapers covered it daily. Community groups praised the decision. Even national outlets began discussing the story as an example of long overdue accountability in financial institutions. Yet for Brandon, the victory wasn't in the headlines or in the settlement he later received. The real victory was knowing that silence no longer protected the wrong people. He returned to work gradually, meeting clients, finalizing new contracts, and rebuilding normalcy for his daughter. Maya asked gentle questions now and then, curious but proud. She had watched her father stand strong in a storm most adults wouldn't dare face. One evening she said, "Daddy, you changed something big." Brandon smiled softly. "Maybe, but I had a lot of help." He thought of Elena, of Jordan, of the dozens of strangers who stepped forward with bravery of their own. He realized the fight hadn't been his alone. It had been shared, strengthened, multiplied. When the dust finally settled, Brandon chose a new bank, one known for its transparent practices and community involvement. He walked into the branch carrying a standard deposit, nothing grand this time, just part of his company's new contract earnings. As soon as he approached the counter, the teller looked up with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" The word landed differently now. It wasn't fear or recognition or nervous respect. It was just courtesy, the kind every person deserves without needing to prove their worth. Brandon handed over the check, and the transaction proceeded smoothly. No excessive questions, no suspicious glances, no pressure. Just simple, dignified service. When he left the building, sunlight spilled across the pavement, and he paused for a quiet moment, breathing in the feeling of being treated as he should have been treated from the beginning. Fairness wasn't a privilege. It was a right. Later that afternoon, he visited the scholarship foundation he had established, named in honor of his father. The Gerald Coleman Scholarship, dedicated to young Black students pursuing technology and entrepreneurship. "This is for the ones who will build something great," he told the board, "so they never feel small in rooms they earned the right to enter." The board members nodded, inspired by his resolve. As months passed, more victims from various banks found the courage to speak up. The case sparked statewide reforms, new training requirements, and an independent oversight committee. Brandon never sought fame, but people began calling him a quiet force, someone whose dignity ignited change without shouting. He accepted the praise humbly, knowing that courage wasn't loud, it was persistent. One evening, as he tucked Maya into bed, she asked again, "Daddy, was everything you went through worth it?" Brandon thought of the torn check, the cold stares, the shame he refused to carry, the word "sir" arriving too late, and the countless people who would walk into banks tomorrow with a fairer chance than he had. He kissed her forehead gently. "Yes," he answered, "because respect should never arrive at the end of the story. It should be there the moment you walk in." And with that, the chapter closed, not as a tale of anger, but as a testament to resilience, justice, and the power of refusing to shrink in the face of disrespect.